Hey there, Dave Paulides, Canada Missing Project, copyrighted edition for our video channel. And we're back on the missing people topic again. And this will be nothing but letters relating to missing people and the missing people cases themselves. Please hang in there. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Before I get really into the missing person topic, one thing I want to say is all of the Canadian truckers, coupled with all of the American truckers that have joined them going to Ottawa, we are with you. All of you need to go. Surround Ottawa. Force Trudeau to talk to you. I'm with you, 1,000%. We need that in the United States as well. That's it. So, let's get right into the letters. I was very interested in your latest YouTube excerpt concerning Gordon Sagu. Gordon was a case that we highlighted a couple back. I immigrated from England to Chilliwack. I was corrected very soon after moving here. It's pronounced Chilliwack in July 2016, and recall well the missing persons posters of him on various trails. It affected me greatly at a time. The fact someone disappeared, as I just never come across this before. It was shortly after I found your work and began reading your books. I regularly hike the weekends in the Chilliwack River Valley, and a 20-minute drive from my door, and I'm in the general area. Like you said, stunning scenery and endless trails to hike, but in parts, an odd area, something you can't quite put your finger on. I've heard this from many people. From the first time I started to do the research on Gordon's disappearance, I realized that there were many other disappearances within that 50-mile radius, all very strange. Covered almost all of them in Missing 411 Canada. I'm an avid hiker. Like I said, rarely not doing this on weekends. Aside from what I'm going to tell you, I've had some unusual experiences in this area. Rock throwing, odd vocalizations, and a very scary experience last fall of being paralleled by something on the trail. Maybe this is linked to other subjects you've researched, but I've had no idea. If you're in that area, Baby Mundy, M-U-N-D-Y, Peak in British Columbia, it's kind of in the area that I'm interested in. I regularly hike the Ford Mountain area. This is very close to Baby Mundy in the Chima mountain range. At the summit of Ford, you can easily see Baby Mundy. I've also hiked the Lindeman and Green Drop Lake trails, which you've also mentioned a case in your book. This occurred since my time. Being aware of what has happened in the area, I'm very cautious hiking and try not to go alone. I have to say it's hard not to look at the relevant mountains and not think about what's happened there. I usually avoid this particular area for that very reason. A strange incident happened to me and my wife last year. We had hiked the Ford Mountain, and when we reached the bottom, again we rested by some swamps in the forest at the base of the mountain. Excuse me. We hadn't seen anyone that day and no vehicles. If you're a fit individual, Ford Mountain is a comfortable hike. I'd like to point out too that there's no logging activity up there, and nothing but forest and ridgeline. We suddenly heard an enormous loud bang, not an explosion or a gunshot. I can only describe it like the sound of a huge heavy door slamming or the dropping of a huge weight on a solid surface. It sounded almost metallic, most definitely not organic in any way. It actually echoed for a split second through the mountain. I thought I was going to collapse. It was that loud. We both got an uneasy feeling about it, and it didn't sound like anything we could rationalize, so we left. If there's one thing I learned from you, it's leave immediately when you get such a sense. Bingo. On a different note, your comments regarding Chilliwack Search and Rescue. Applied to become a member 3 years ago. I attended an open day where I met the team and listened to team leaders give presentations. Working as a physiotherapist, I was treating RCMP members at the time who urged me to join, stating I was an ideal candidate. I do recall one RCMP patient, however, who did tell me he found them arrogant and it was a very cliquey organization. And to get in, it's a case of who you know, not what you know. Needless to say, I was unsuccessful and didn't get selected for an interview. I've since treated several members within my work. Without sounding like sour grapes, I must say there was something about them as individuals I just didn't like. I've heard they are an exceptionally well-trained and equipped search and rescue and have an excellent reputation. I'm now considering applying for a volunteer firefighter instead. I believe in helping the local community. Good man. And I would tell you that not all search and rescue organizations are like that. The type of organization, I don't care where it is, whether it's human resources or engineering in a business unit, the attitude of that organization usually is represented by the leader because they pick people like themselves. Just some food for thought. In closing, I'd like to extend my thoughts to you with the unimaginable situation you've been through this last year. As a father of 3 sons, I admit at times I've struggled to watch your talks, but it 100% has made me highly conscious of being aware of changes with my boys and having chats with them about their well-being. I'm sure you've had this effect on other parents too, so please know that in the darkest of times, for you, that you and Ben are having a positive effect on so many. Thank you. I've said many times that unfortunate victims of this pandemic is the youth. I'm afraid the unseen effects of this are going to be apparent for many years to come, and the youth, in my opinion, had the hardest times at present. I'm spiritual more than religious, and I hope your faith gives you the strength to continue with your work and family. I send heartfelt positive thoughts to you and your family. Thank you. Keep up the fantastic work, Dave. Fight the good fight. So many are on the same page as you. Let me say that I have tons of really, really good friends in Canada who have the same concerns that we all do. And I pray for our cousins up north just like I pray for my brothers and sisters in the U.S. We're all the same. I don't care where you go on the earth. I've been to a lot of countries. I've been very fortunate. People are people. And 99% of people are good people. That's what we have to remember. So thanks for that letter. Mr. Paulides, greetings from the sticks. I'm a resident of Northeast Texas, and I've been for my entire life, 40 years. Keep this as brief as possible. I know your time is valuable and don't want to waste it. Please accept my deepest sympathies over the loss of your son, Ben. Please remember that he lives on in you, and wherever you go, you take him with him. Hope so. First off, thank you. Thank you for your tireless work and the dedication to the missing. Thank you for giving us all your service as a police officer. Thank you for being a voice of hope for those struggling with mental illness. It doesn't go unnoticed. My sister committed suicide a year ago today after 12 years of dealing with an excruciating medical issue. Sometimes I miss her so much that it hurts to breathe. The guilt I feel is crippling, but thanks to you I'm seeing a grief counselor and I'm starting to be able to cope more efficiently with my anger and grief. You save lives. Yes, you do. Not only the lives of people struggling with suicidal thoughts, but of the ones who leave behind. Soldier on. I feel your pain. And for everybody I'm serious, and I know there's probably hundreds watching that have this thought in the back of their mind. If you're thinking about taking your life, remember the impact that will have on everyone around you. It will be devastating. It's devastated my life for the last year. Please don't. Please find a NAMI organization, NAMI, to get to and get into their classes. They are outstanding. I've been through them. I've been with their people. They care. Next, I'll get to the meat of the email. When I watched your video where you were speaking of the anomaly in the skies, I was astonished that you perfectly described exactly what I've been seeing in the sky above my place of employment, and subsequently my own home. I noticed it back in October, I believe. I have the video of it. Took video of a flashing light again a few days ago. Today, however, it's gone. That's not my only UFO experience, though. When I was 6 and my middle sister was 5, we saw, felt, and heard a craft above the tree line at our childhood home. Here's the kicker. We weren't the only ones by a long shot. And here's the story. In the summer of '87, we'd been out swimming all day with my mom. My mom's best friend and her daughter, who was 8 years old. Since we were so young, they stuck us in the tub together, and while we were drying ourselves, and the windows of the house began to rattle. It scared us kids, and we started crying and calling our moms. They'd been listening to loud music in the kitchen. They came flying into the bathroom to see what was happening. It was then that my mom and her friend heard the rattling. Windows for themselves. They rapidly dried us off and had us dress. Then we walked outside to see what was going on. By this point, the entire house was trembling and the windows were violently shaking. It was still broad daylight, and we clearly saw an object the length of a football field flying just above our tree line in the backyard near our neighbor's pasture. It was cigar-shaped and a dull silver on the underside, with multicolored lights around the entirety of the craft. The top was a more shiny-looking metallic material. It still had a dull look to it. My mom grabbed us and ran out inside to call my aunt, who was a dispatcher at the local PD. My aunt told her to stop being annoying and not to call with that stuff again. 2 minutes later, my aunt called back and told my mom that they were receiving calls as far as away a 2-mile radius from our house, all describing the same event. Just then, my mom's friend runs in to tell my mom that the craft looked like it was going to land. We ran back out, and sure enough, we could see it topping the hill on the pasture and drop down until we couldn't see it anymore. And that was low. The people on the road adjacent to ours said that they saw the same thing, and they were also saying they believed it was landing. Within 10 minutes, we had county deputies and city cops on either side of the pasture walking within arm's length of each other. The plan was to meet in the middle. When they topped the hill, there was absolutely nothing there except another group of officers. And nothing had flown away. We would have seen it. Someone would have seen it flying off. No spot where it landed, just nothing. It vanished. Did it vanish or did it go into stealth mode? Could it have been there? This was in Bowie County, DeKalb, Texas. I've searched for a report of these events, cannot seem to find anything. At least 40 citizens of our small town saw this, and 20 to 30 cops were called out because of it. Maybe with your connections you might be able to dig something up. If so, I'd like to know. Well, you can check yourself. Go to the UFO Reporting Center, and you can look up the reports by date, location, etc. Anybody can. And that's it. If you'd like to see the videos of the flashing light anomaly, I'll gladly send them to you. Please let me know when you get a chance. Again, thanks for all you do. Yeah, the UFO Reporting Center is a great site. It has thousands of reports going many decades back. I encourage you to go there. So this, all these letters are pretty good. Yeah, dear Dave, I watch your videos often, and I just saw the video on the flashing multicolored lights in the sky. I've long been a sky watcher and see lights stationary and moving on a regular basis. I write you because of you were wanting to hear from people who see these multicolored lights. I live about 25 miles west of the NASA facilities here in Central Florida in a little town called Austin. I bought this house 3 years ago, but I have seen the lights you have referenced for over a decade. When I first noticed it, I was in the western sky and often see it there. Over the years, though, I began to carry binoculars, and when I sit on the back porch just to get a little better look at the objects I observe, and I can see 4 or 5 of the multicolored objects at a time on some nights. I've thought to myself that they are spaced strategically around the sky because of their locations. I would love to hear your thoughts on that. They are exactly as you say, with a spectrum of colors. It almost looks like as though they flash and spin at the same rate. I've often wondered if others notice them as I do. I felt somewhat vindicated when you brought them up. My wife teases me all the time, though I've pointed those out and moving lights to her on multiple occasions that they were obviously not aircraft. The moving lights remind me of the moving lights that NASA had filmed out the windows on their space missions. They seem to be out of the atmosphere, and some are visible for several minutes before fading out. I've seen some that look like they slow down and speed up, but it's almost like my eyes are playing tricks on me. I really hope you do a follow-up video giving your thoughts and the thoughts of others that respond. Really curious to hear how others describe their observations. I appreciate all that you do. Prayers to you and your family. Thank you. So, I've had people report to me them seeing these things over Europe as well. Poland, and throughout North America. I'm interested in it, if anyone's seeing these in South America. I haven't gotten a report from them yet. So, next letter is a very interesting one. I'm going to show you where we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about this area called Dowling, D-O-W-L-I-N-G, Michigan. This is Chicago right here. This area, starting here and going up the Great Lake, high strangeness. I've written about this in almost all of my books. The area is hyper unusual. Planes have disappeared in the Great Lakes. Planes have disappeared on land. People have disappeared on land. It just goes on and on and on. So when I saw Dowling, Michigan, wow. I'm paying attention. Guaranteed. First, let me state that how much of a fan I am. I took a huge interest in your Missing 411 series, and I'm a huge outdoor enthusiast. That in turn led me to watching your documentaries, becoming a subscriber to the Can-Am YouTube channel, and now I'm looking forward to purchasing your books as well. Thank you. A little bit about myself. 37 years old and live in Battle Creek, Michigan. I lived in this area nearly all my life. As I stated before, I have a love of the outdoors. I grew up in a little country town called Dowling, just north of Battle Creek. From a young age, my dad would take us fishing and morel hunting. Morel mushrooms. I am more than sure that this is where my love of the outdoors and water began. My favorite time of the year became the week surrounding Memorial Day weekend, as we took an annual 2-week morel hunting and fishing trip in the Pigeon River State Forest. Our group would typically consist of myself, my 2 brothers, my dad, and my 2 uncles, Bob and Lester. I would love to share a few of my experiences and strange details on some of these trips. I'm also curious to know if any of the missing cases fit the 411 criteria. I started joining my dad and uncle on this trip in 1997 because you had to be at least 13 to go. My dad and uncle had been going for years before then. They just knew they couldn't bring us at too young of an age due to just how much walking and off-trail they had to do. I definitely understood why immediately when we hit our first woods. Now I had hunted plenty around the home in Yankee Springs recreation area. That in no way prepared me for my first hunt in the northern woods. We literally set out after breakfast, packed bags and snacks, drinks, and didn't return until after dark. Needless to say, we spent a lot of time in the deep woods, far from any trail. They wanted to hunt the areas we knew for sure hadn't been hunted previously. Often we would have to start walking back to the truck when there was still 2 to 3 hours of daylight. Now for the strange. The two craziest instances I experienced actually happened at night while sitting around the campfire eating the morels we foraged and the fish we had caught. We don't camp at a campground or even remotely close to one as the camp areas they have set up on the Pigeon River. We entered through the town of Vanderbilt and spent there. It's 45 minutes of driving unmarked tracks deep into the forest. The campsites we use are actually ones we built throughout the years. We're about half a mile from the Cornwall Creek flooding, a man-made lake where we have to carry our boat from camp to the water back to sitting around the fire. This year was kind of special because it was my senior year in high school, 2002. We had an exchange student from Brazil living with us. And they came with us. The site we chose that year was on some higher ground overlooking a clearing with more dense woods behind it. We were expecting a lot of rain that year, hence the high ground. Our exchange student noticed a flash of light in the woods on the opposite side of the clearing. After getting all of our attention, we proceeded to watch as these lights rose to the top of the tree line, sat for a brief time, then slowly lowered back into the trees. Then it repeated this action for another 5 times. The last time it rose, however, upon hovering just above the tree line, it took off completely vertical at an unimaginable speed. We were all in disbelief. Our exchange student and my younger brother were even brought to tears because they just couldn't believe what we had just seen. None of us has forgotten a bit of what happened, and the story is still talked about every year around the fire. Wondering if we'll ever see something like that again. I can tell you, thousands of people have seen something like this, but it's a gift to see it. My other campfire experience took place 2 years later in 2004. Once again, we were all sitting around the fire. I was having a great time because it was in the first year I was allowed to drink beers with the old timers. We were up a little later than usual, making a little more noise than we normally do. My brother has been creeped out at night ever since the UFO experience, so it's usually a bit on the edge after dark. He said he heard some rustling behind our camp somewhere in the woods. We started picking on him a little bit, but in a little moment of silence, we all heard the rustling. Not 5 seconds of hearing that, it was followed by what we could only explain as a big cat being attacked. It was very clearly a big cat, but it sounded to be very much in distress. Now this was only 50 yards tops behind the camp in the woods. Everybody but myself and my Uncle Bob ran to the pop-up, and I mean ran. Apparently Uncle Bob and I had a little more liquid courage in us because we went to investigate. We grabbed our beers, flashlights, and knives and headed into the woods. This all happened pretty quick, I'd say 30-second tops. From when we heard it, we were heading to the source. We never heard another sound. In fact, the woods got more quiet that night than I'd ever heard before. Pretty typical. When you hear weird things like this in the woods that make no sense, many times it's followed by this silence. And it's almost as though the woods couldn't have produced the sound. It had to have been artificially produced somehow. The last thing is just comical to me as it is bizarre. This time something that happened deep in the woods while mushroom hunting. Doesn't even need a setup. This was just something truly bizarre we all saw after simply walking up on it. While walking a set of ridges we have regularly hunted for years, we stumbled across the largest accumulation of elk poop you could ever imagine. Now, I've seen my fair share of animal droppings in the woods through the years, but I've never before or even after seen so much in one place. we seriously found a pyramid of elk droppings that was every bit of 4 or 5 feet tall. This was a perfect pyramid, like it was all intricately placed there on purpose. We were all baffled by this. Not even my dad or uncle had ever seen anything like it. Like I said, comical and weird. Thanks again for what you do. So, that brings up a good story. When I was in Hoopa, I was given permission to go into areas of the reservation that nobody was allowed to go into. And as it was described to me, that was their area, and we stay in our area. You're an honored visitor, Dave, so you can go wherever you want. So myself, one of the tribal elders, walked way deep one day. And the way we got there is we crossed a river on a boat to get to an area that was really off limits that we could go into, and then we walked. Walked a couple miles. We get to a tree. And first of all, this area had so many black bears. You couldn't believe it. One day there, I counted probably 30 in 4 hours. All different ones. They're everywhere. And there's this weird relationship between the Hoopa people and the bears. The bears are around them every day. Nobody bothers the bears. The bears don't bother the people. And even though I was carrying a big gun all the time, the biggest black bear I've ever seen was probably 700 pounds. There. It was fat. It was huge. But we're walking through this area. And we get up under this big oak tree. And it was a huge tree. Big, massive branches. And as we're walking up to it, I'm starting to notice a lot of bear poop. Lots of bear poop. Then we get to this one branch that had to have been, 3-foot diameter. It was huge. This tree was hundreds of years old. Under this one branch, probably, 10 feet from the branch to the ground, was this pile of bear poop that had to have been 4 feet high. I'm not kidding you. And me and the elder looked at it and just looked around. We couldn't believe what we were seeing, kind of like this elk. And then I looked up at the branch. I'm looking for scratch marks in the oak tree. The only thing that made sense is that some bear made their home on that branch for many years, for many days. I can't even imagine how many bear poop was there. It had to have been hundreds. So when I read that about the elk, it's pretty weird. I still, to this day, have never seen a pile of bear poop like that. So, new email. Thought about sending you this for a long time. First of all, let me say that I appreciate all that you do for us, and totally agree with you on your viewpoints about what's going on in the world. Having 3 children, it's scary to say the least. Try to keep this short as possible. May of 2019, I purchased a used side-by-side from a friend. One evening, my wife and I decided to take it to a test ride on a local trail that we knew very well. Sorry. After leaving the kids with my mom, we headed the approximate 1.5 miles to the trail. As soon as we turned down the trail, my wife says, "Do you think we'll make it down that one hill okay?" I said, "You mean the one at the end?" Because there was only one hill that I would have been concerned about. She said, "No, the one in the middle with the steps on it." I knew one she was talking about it went down pretty steep with several steps dropping in elevation. I assured her it would be fine. I would only be worried if I were going up these muddy conditions. As we rode, chatting about things, she mentioned that the hill a few more times, her concern. However, we got down it with no problems. Directly at the bottom of the hill was a big mud hole that we needed to go around, and when we stopped to put it in four-wheel drive, we noticed a large limb about 5 inches in diameter stuck beside the hole in the middle of the trail, sticking straight up. Another thing I could think of, it must have fallen from a tree. So we went around it and rode on. Stop you here if you haven't heard this story. It's a good one. Angie and I were on a trail in Colorado. And we were on this trail of high strangeness. Very high. A lot of weird things happened on it to us. We walked in like 3 or 4 miles one day. It's along a river. And we were talking and laughing. And I said, yeah, you know what you ought to do is we ought to start banging on trees like some of the other fools do. So Angie hands me this big piece of wood, and I hit the side of this tree and it just explodes. It was a dead limb, had bug infested, things fly. It doesn't even make a sound. We all laugh. So walk back about a mile from the truck in rock hard soil. I mean rock hard. Angie's in front of me, 3 or 4 feet. And I could see her on the trail past something in the trail. And I walk up onto it, and it's this tree branch or tree. It's probably about 6 or 7 feet long with no branches or anything on it. It's like a straight pole, sharpened at the end, and slammed down into this rock hard soil to stand there straight. I yell, Angie, come here. She turned around, comes back, and she goes, that was not here, but I passed it. I go, how could that be? And she goes, I would have walked right into it. I said, I see it. And so we noticed that there's almost like fingernail scrapings that take off the branches on this thing to make it smooth. And we talked about it. Then we thought, that's the weirdest thing. We've been on this trail dozens of times. We never saw anybody in the parking lot today. It wasn't there when we walked out, and it was there when we came back. Then the more we talked about it, she said, Dave, remember the branch that blew up in your hands? Well, here's the big good stick to go hit trees. Somebody's giving it to you. Wow. We took it home. I still have it. Anyhow. So, they're in the ATV. They're driving around. We're talking about this tree in the middle of this trail. Near the end of this trail is a lookout. We call it. We always stop here, take a break, and admire the view. And as we did this night as well. It was dark now, but still a great view of the locks and the dam of the Ohio River below us. It was getting late, so we decided to go. From here, the trail followed along a cliff for about 1/8 of a mile, and then dropped down directly across the dam. We were headed down that part when at the first switchback, we were not where we were supposed to be. Meaning we were back at the broken branch in the mud hole facing up the hill in the opposite direction we'd been traveling. It was like cutting into a different scene in a movie. In the blink of an eye, we were just somewhere else. We just looked at each other in shock. It was horrifying. Luckily, I knew where we were, at the bottom of the hill she had just been worried about, right by the broken branch sticking out of the ground. After a quick conversation about what the heck just happened, we agreed to get out of there ASAP. The side-by-side was still idling and in gear, so I locked it in and gunned it up the hill in sheer strange panic. When we got to the top of the hill, things got even weirder. There, lying across the middle of the trail, was my hard hat. The same hard hat that we had been using at the lookout because it had a light on it. It should have been in the back of the side-by-side. I grabbed it and we raced back to my mom's home. After calming down a bit and telling our story that no one believed, I remembered that I had turned up on my app that I had just downloaded a few days ago. It was called an X-Hunt, I believe, and it had a cool feature that marked to mark your trail. When we looked at the app, I was even more mystified. It showed from where the incident happened in a straight line sort of northwest out of the downloaded map of the area, and a straight line at a slightly different angle back to the bottom of the steep hill. Well, that's it. Believe it or not, most people don't, even though we are perfectly sane and never tell lies. The few people I've told say this must have gotten lost or took a wrong turn or something. I don't know if you've ever seen a Loxon Dam on the Ohio at night, but it's unmistakable. It's lit up like a small town. We could see it, and then it was gone. I know where we were, and there were no other trails to make a wrong turn. My question is, have you ever known of an incident like this to have happened, or have been mapped? I'd love to know where we went, or what happened that night. Secondly, I don't have the app or the map anymore. After looking at it a million times with no answers, I deleted it out of frustration. Now that I follow your work, I noticed a few things. The water, the rocky cliffs we were traveling, how far northwest we might have gone. I'll never know, but that's the direction of a whole lot of water in those Great Lakes. Sorry for the terrible grammar. I'm just a high school graduate trying to raise a family on a steelworker's wages. But if we were some kind of intellects, might not have ever made it back to those beautiful children. Yeah, good point. Yeah, good stories. Thanks. I've never heard of a story mapped out like that, so it's pretty weird. As some people might say, you entered a portal and you got kicked back out. I don't know. A lot of stories from hunters about walking down ridge lines on property that they had hunted 100 times, and then all of a sudden they're on a ridge line in property they've never seen before. Very odd. Today's stories all about Canada. I get a lot of requests. Hey, can you do more Canada cases? Okay, here we go. 3 in one night. So, first case, April 2nd, 1996, Vancouver Island. Been there many times. Have some friends that live there. Island is an unusual place. It has a couple big cities, and it has ultra beauty. Big rivers, dense forests. It's just a pristine location to live. And they have all kinds of wildlife you could ever imagine. And they have some of the wildest missing persons cases you can ever imagine. Now, it is an island surrounded by water. Water's everywhere. So, there's a woman named Joanna Giannakos. Yes, a Greek name, just like Paulides. She was 84 years old, and she was in good shape for an 84-year-old lady. She was born in Greece. She didn't have dementia, and she loved to hike. Hiked around the city, believed it kept her healthy. Sometimes she hiked 3 times a day. She was a grandmother of 11 kids and a great-grandmother at 12. You talk about a lady with a great background. She moved to a town called Ladysmith, British Columbia in 1988 and established a life there. On April 2nd, 96, she was staying with her son, just right on the outskirts of Ladysmith. And at 9:30 a.m., here's Joanna. At 9:30 a.m., she took off and started to walk. And she was going to be in the downtown area and walk around that area and be back about noon. Friends and family saw her at about 1 to 2 in the afternoon in Ladysmith. Well, she never returned. That night, her family called the RCMP, and they bring out everything imaginable. Helicopters, planes, search and rescue, hundreds of people. Her family rallied friends. There was a huge turnout that went on for days. Well, RCMP knew she was in that downtown area at one point. Dogs could never pick up a scent. And the standard search and rescue protocol would say somebody in average health or age, you should set up that perimeter at least 2 miles, maybe out to 4 miles, and cover it completely. I'm sure they did with the dogs. Well, on April 5th, the search and rescue was terminated. Initially. That was only 3 days. Well, then the family got upset. On April 9th, they started again. Then on April 15th, they terminated again. So 2 separate searches, family and friends, professional searchers both times, canines both times. They don't find anything. There's a lot of conjecture. Maybe she got kidnapped. Maybe there was some type of predation. They weren't sure. But on April 10th, 98, almost 2 years after she disappeared, some hikers were 1.5 kilometers outside of downtown Ladysmith. Not very far at all. And they were up a very steep mountain. Very lush, described as searchers as very thick. And they found what they believed was Joanna's remains. Now, why is that important? Very important. A series of search and rescue people were interviewed. And they said, that was well within the search zone. What happened when you searched that area? All the searchers said, we never searched it because there's no way we believe she could have gotten there. Remember, she had a medical appointment before the disappearance. They said she didn't have dementia or Alzheimer's. So search and rescue is a pretty good judge of people, because the decisions are made in conjunction with the family. They made a decision that Joanna no way could get there. So how did she get there? How did she die? There was so little left of the remains that they didn't know how she died. So this is one of those cases where I ask people, think in your head, common sense, critical thinker, how's this stuff happen? Now, where's Ladysmith? Okay. Here's a picture. This is the southern tip of Vancouver Island. This is the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State. Disappearances of people all over this area. Disappearances of people all over this area. The common factor? This body of water. As I've stated many times, its proximity to water. Right here is also Olympic National Park, where there's a bunch of strange disappearances. On this portion of the Olympics, it's all young boys that have disappeared. Very strange. The island has a lot of disappearances as well. So, just for understanding, this is the US-Canadian border. This is Vancouver. So you got it? So, Joanna Giannakos. I wish I knew what happened to that lady. Something highly unusual. Remember, she lived with her kids at that time just outside the city. There was no reason to climb a giant hill, insurmountable conditions, where search and rescue didn't think she could get to. Just had to walk a few streets to her house. Yeah, what happened? Next story. This one, when I did the research on it, it's another one of those stories that you're going to shake your head and go, come on. Well, W.T. Thompson, also 84 years old, in a strange coincidence. He was a Manitoba government surveyor for 50 years. in very good shape. He was a graduate of McGill University in civil engineering and got his graduate degree. He was known as the Old Man of the North in Manitoba. He knew essentially everything there is to know about surveying that northern area of the province. He was born in Northumberland, Ontario, and he had worked for the government of Manitoba for 50 years. He lived in a town called Cranberry Portage. And on July 18th, 1938, WT and two assistants, WT, with two assistants, Maynard Johnson and James Dewar, went out to survey quartz claims at a location called Cold Lake. They got into canoes, crossed the lake, and as they were crossing, they got separated, point of separation. Later that night, his assistants couldn't find him, and they called the RCMP. And immediately they dispatched 3 airplanes, multiple ground teams. It was one of the biggest manhunts in Manitoba's history at that point. Now, what's really interesting is that in all the articles they said that WT had a sextant with him. Now, being a surveyor, that means he knew where he was all the time because he had the device to tell him. So he was never lost. But they couldn't find him. 3 airplanes flying that Cold Lake in and out, back and forth. So, as time goes on, there's hundreds of people involved. It's a government employee, older man. It's not making any sense. During the search, one of the searchers disappeared for several days. A very unusual event. He eventually made his way back to the base headquarters where the seaplanes were located on the lake. Now, on July 17th, 1938, 9 days after he disappeared. On July 8th. He disappeared July 8th and was found July 17th. So 9 days after he disappears. On a shoreline, 100 feet from where airplanes had flown that lake, in a grid pattern, they find WT laying on the shoreline. And some of his giant blueprints were laying on the shoreline, and everyone thought that they were laying there in position to be an SOS so the planes could see him. He was found 15 miles from the point of separation from his partners, but nobody could explain how the planes missed him for 9 days. So, I want you to look at all of the water in this part of northern Manitoba. This would be the northwest portion of the province, and he was on a place called Cold Lake. Now, what happened here? I have a very difficult time understanding this. The government threw out everything they had to find WT. It was a huge search. And especially for 1938, throw in 3 airplanes, that's huge. If you've ever flown over northern Canada, it all has kind of the same look to it. And when you see a beach and you see blueprints on it, they're going to stand out like a sore thumb. You're not going to miss them. There's no way. There was an article in the July 16th, 1938 edition of the Leader Post, and it talked about WT, and I want to read this to you. It says, Mr. Thompson was one of the true pioneering breed, keen, capable, and with a true vision of the years to come. He was essentially a builder, and the wide, new country fascinated him. Not for him to wear slippers and chimney nook or restful age and work well done, The quote-unquote red gods of the distant places were continually calling him, and he hearkened to their summons. He ached to be out over the fences and beyond the boundaries, and neither age nor weariness nor distance could hold him. He was seeing the development of a vast domain over his lifetime, played a notable part in the first beginnings, and lived to see the fruition of the epic which he dreamed. Some things written long ago are well said. WT was a strange breed. They found him on the beach deceased. And some people said he died of privation, starvation. Others said he died of hypothermia. I find it all strange. First of all, 9 days. Most people would not die of starvation in 9 days. You can live a long time without food. You can't live a long time without water. He was on a lake, and he was in a very swampy area. He had water everywhere. And during that time of July, be a very good chance that that area had a lot of berries in it. So, I don't know. Strange case, to say the least. So the next case involves something that's even more unusual. That's the disappearance of two people at the same time. It's probably less than 1% of the cases I have ever documented. First case both of them involve the same people. Absolom, Hackett, 40, and James Brady, 40. Missing June 12, 1967, from North Saskatchewan, a place called Lower Foster Lake. Both the guys were from Lorong, and they were both employed by the Precambrian Exploration Company. They were employed as prospectors, and they were considered some of the toughest, most knowledgeable outdoorsmen, prospectors that they could find. The company respected them immensely. The men had a radio where they regularly checked in at a place called the Rotten Stone Mine. Rotten Stone Mine, that's funny. And that last check-in date was June 12, 67. They didn't check in again. On the 14th, the company rallied their best people and an RCMP team that flew into the area where they were missing. And on June 23rd, again, they went missing on June 12, 67. June 23rd, after several days of searching, RCMP found a campsite that they figured was probably 10 days, 12 days old. And 4 miles from there, they found the pair's beached canoe on the water. The company gave a press release and said that these two guys could survive anything. Wow. Well, the RCMP knew that they had a campsite, and they brought in canines to search. Canines didn't go anywhere. They couldn't find any scent trail leaving that area. Well, the search went on until July 7th of 67. So, the guys lived in a small little city called Lorong, and then they were in an area up here, which was their destination, Rotten Stone Lake. Again, what do you see on that map? Yeah, that's right, nothing but water. Tons of water. What happened to these men? It's very, very hard to explain when a company describes their employees as salt of the earth, survive anything, seasoned outdoorsmen, 40 years old, prime of health. What can happen to them? 2 of them. March 28th, 1969, almost 2 years after the pair disappeared, there was an inquest into their death, and the coroner reached an open verdict and presumed that both men were dead. What is that? I've told you guys what that means. When a government group lists you as presumed deceased, you're not in any search and rescue role. You're not a missing person anymore. You're dead. So that means nobody will be searching for you ever again. Nobody really knows about you. And chances are nobody will ever even hear about the story. Now this story, you will never see it anywhere before you've seen it right here. And all of a sudden, all these unusual sites, strange sites that you see on the web, missing people, they'll come, they'll grab the story, and they'll present it like it's their work. Watch. Nobody ever says anything to them, and they'll just make money off of our research. It's darn frustrating. But I don't do that for them. I do that for the families of the missing, here to educate you. And I appreciate you being here. And I know you appreciate my efforts. That's why I keep doing it. I want people to know that the outdoors can be very dangerous. It's not a playground. You can disappear just as easy in the wilderness as you can by being abducted by a predator in a big city. Just remember, deep in the wilderness, there are no witnesses. That's right. So the disappearance of Mr. Hackett and Brady ranks up there as really unusual. So prayers to them and their family. Rest in peace. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. I appreciate your comments. Appreciate your support. This Thursday night, first week in February 2022, this Thursday night, I'm giving you the first heads up of it. I'm going to be on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie, first 2 hours of the program. And I'm going to make an announcement there about something coming. It's pretty big. And I think you might be interested in it. So that's this Thursday night, first week in August 2022, Coast to Coast AM. I haven't done an interview in over a year, so George and I are old friends. He does a good job. Should be fun. And usually he likes to leave at least a half an hour for call-ins, so if you have any questions, try to get in and call him. Again, Coast to Coast AM. It's an AM radio channel. I think they're on 600 stations now. It's a big show. Anyhow, thank you. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Do not buy my books on Amazon, eBay, anywhere online. Buy them from my site. They're $24.99. I don't want you to get ripped off by going there. It's not us selling them there. So, have a good rest of your weekend, and hopefully I'll see you soon. Paulides out.